Great. Welcome everybody. Welcome to our December swag meeting, last meeting of 2023. We have circulated an agenda to everybody and we have some guest speakers tonight. I think Brian and I spoke and we're going to shift the agenda around a little bit because we have members from the school department here so we can give them a chance to give their presentation and speak, and you don't have to stay all evening. So yeah, why don't we go ahead and get started? First thing we'll do, why don't we just do introductions so everybody knows who's here at the table. So I'll start. My name's Andrea Amico. I'm a Portsmouth resident. I am a PFAS water advocate and I co-chair the Safe Water Advisory Group with Brian Getz.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jim Hewitt, and this is my second meeting. And I'm a planning board member and a longtime Portsmouth resident.
Hi, I'm Katri Hillman. I'm a citizen resident and I've been on the swag since it started.
I'm Kim McNamara, the Director of the Portsmouth Health Department.
Mason Caceres. I work for the city of Portsmouth as a water quality specialist.
Hi, I'm Mariah Habershaw. I'm a water quality specialist as well at the city of Portsmouth.
And Stephanie Secord, Public Information Officer and scribe for this committee.
Brian Getz, Director of Water, Deputy Director of Public Works, City of Portsmouth, and Laurel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laurel Shader. I'm a senior scientist at Silent Spring Institute.
Great, and let's see if we have anyone else out there. No, just me as host and also watching over here to make sure technology works. Laurel, are you hearing us and seeing us out there? You can let us know yes or no. Do you see a?
Yeah. Yeah, I can see both the room and I see the slides.
Okay, great, thank you.
They're not in presentation mode, but I can see them. Yeah.
And tonight we have some school department representatives, and when we get them up here, we'll have them join us, and then we'll let them speak. So Andrew, if okay, we'll just mention we'll shift in light of the school being here, we'll shift over to the other portion and then swing back to the water supply update and the water projects update afterward.
Sounds great. I think the first thing we just need to do before we get started is approve our minutes from the last meeting. So I need a motion to do that. If anyone wants to make a motion to approve the September swag meeting minutes. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Is everybody in favor of approving the swag meeting minutes from September 2023? Okay. Is anyone against that? All right, meeting minutes approved. Thank you very much. So yeah, as Brian said, we are going to shift our agenda around a little bit. We do have Dr. Zachary McLaughlin, the superintendent of Portsmouth Schools here tonight, as well as Kenny Lynchy, who is director of facilities. Did I get that right? Okay. And they are going to be discussing lead testing that was done at the Portsmouth schools. They have prepared some slides. So we'll have, we're going to start with Mason, right?
Mason,
Okay, I'm sorry. We're actually going to start with Mason from the water department, who's going to give us an overview about lead. And then we'll switch over to the school department to have them share the testing that they've done. So Mason, we will pass it to you.
Sounds good. Here we go. Let me get you full screen here, Mason.
All right, so we'll jump right in. This whole presentation is going to be about the lead and copper rule that was created and required by the EPA and administered by the Department of Environmental Services. This is an all-encompassing program at this point. I mean, it's a hot topic of conversation. Thought it was a good opportunity to speak to everything we do within the city of Portsmouth. And kind of just break down everything involved with this whole rule. And then it's going to bleed into the free lead testing opportunity that we had talked about in the last meeting. So if you want to go.
There we go.
So yeah, to further break down the talking points of the presentation, like I said, it's going to be an overview of the lead and copper rule, starting with the breakdown of the compliance requirements that the EPA had created back in 1991. Then we'll get into the frequency and quantity of the collections, the 2023 results up to this point, which we just wrapped up last month, and then the outreach follow-up protocols and EPA revisions. We'll just touch on a little bit. There's a lot to that that I don't have time for. And then that'll bleed right into the free lead testing opportunity updates. So this is kind of just a breakdown, very brief. Again, I just don't have enough time to talk about this entire program. I'm sure some of you in this room have seen this infographic before that has been released by the EPA. It really just breaks down all of the potential sources of lead leaching into your drinking water in your own home, whether that's through fixtures themselves, the goosenecks connecting the water main to water service lines. Galvanized pipes can be associated with internal plumbing, and of course lead solder associated with the connections of copper pipes as well. So again, the program created by the EPA, administered by DES, and then we follow all of the regulations associated with what DES is posting and requiring of us. This is the whole sampling program is accomplished through a collaboration of the city of Portsmouth with our consumers. So it kind of, it throws a wrench in the mix sometimes because not everyone is willing to participate. And almost every single year, I've had to go door to door and ask people to participate in this program. And it requires community water systems such as ours to follow this whole protocol and make sure that our corrosion control process is up to speed, so that we're not exceeding the action level of 15 parts per billion of lead and 1.3 parts per million of copper. And the rule revisions to all of this, it's been expanding and being updated over time since 1991, but it's still in motion to be revised, and it's really top priority right now, so we understand that. So to continue that a little bit more, like you've heard about, a lot of water quality parameters or potential contaminants have max contaminant levels associated with them. Under this rule, it is an action level based on an average of the total sample pool that we tackle. So the action level and the baseline of that is to see if our corrosion control treatment processes are working properly and correctly. Which, just to break that down really quick, on the treatment side of things, we adjust the pH to make sure it's not too acidic to contribute to corrosion, using a sodium hydroxide. That's to bump the pH. And then we also introduce polyorthophosphate into the water as well at a very specific level that coats the inside of pipes and prevents corrosion over time. So with that, the whole action level for the lead and copper rule is based on a 90th percentile. And what that means is the concentrations of both lead and copper must be less than or equal to the action level in at least 90% of the samples collected. So if the 15 parts per billion action level for lead is exceeded, then the system is required to take actions such as public education and notification. We need to further optimize the corrosion control process, increase the monitoring involved in this whole rule, and continue replacing lead components in the distribution system. So the sampling protocol, I guess we'll start with the site selection process. It's based on a tiered approach that is required by the EPA and the state. So tier one, all of the sites that we add to our active list is what it's called. You have to start with any known lead service lines specifically associated with single family homes throughout the system, the distribution system. If we know that there aren't any lead service lines, which as of right now, Portsmouth does not have any lead service lines, then we move to tier two. So tier two is the lead service lines associated with multifamily homes. If you've exhausted all of those sampling sites, then you go to tier 3, which is galvanized requiring replacement. That is where we are right now. And that basically our whole active list is prioritizing sample locations with galvanized service lines. So that was kind of a lot. That starts with the site selection process, and that's what we tackle year after year in terms of outreach and requesting participation from these homeowners. And the sample should be collected where water is used most regularly, mostly your kitchen sink. Not everyone does that. And the issue with that is with fixtures themselves. If you have an older fixture in your home, it can leach particulate lead or dissolved lead into the sample. So we try to keep track of these things through collection forms that we dish out to everyone on our list, and try to make sure that they are sampling properly from the right location. And this whole sampling procedure is considered a first draw sample collection after a 6-hour stagnation period, which means you let all of the water sit stagnant in your internal plumbing for 6 hours. And it's basically to look at the worst case scenario for when you first turn on the tap in the morning. So as we might all know, water sitting stagnant is never a good thing. You constantly want to move that water, and the longer it sits, the more potential there is for lead to leach into that water. So we also prioritize cold water sampling, because if you use hot water, it passes through your hot water tank. You could have built up material in there. And typically you don't want to drink hot water straight out of the tap for that reason. That's another thing I should add. So we'll get right into the frequency and quantity of collections over time. We started our corrosion control treatment back in 2003, and we've been improving that ever since. You can see based on the 90th percentile, starting with 12, went to 16 the second half of 2003, and now we're at 1 part per billion. For copper, same thing. We see a reduction over time. This is based on 2023 data. Again, we just wrapped up everything last month. So because we had a new source go online last year, we drilled a new well and introduced that new water into the system. All of the sampling requirements and the monitoring was increased. So we were on this reduced schedule of sampling 30 locations 1 quarter out of the year. But this year it was different, where we had to sample 1 round of 60 samples throughout the Portsmouth water system for the first half, January to June 30th, and then the second from July 1st to the end of this year. If you don't do all those collections and say people aren't jumping at the bit to participate, then we get a violation. If we exceed the 90th percentile, we get a violation. And with those violations, we have to go back to the corrosion control process. We have to push out public notification and outreach materials to everyone within the water system. So it's not a good thing. But we've met the compliance protocol year after year. So we're in good shape. We know what we're doing is up to speed, and that's that. So now we'll get into the actual results, or the summary of the results. If you want to pull up that Excel spreadsheet, that would be great.
Okay. Glasses, there you go, this one.
Yeah.
I need
So this is a live look at everything we keep track of. There is another spreadsheet that I didn't want to throw into the mix because it's pretty chaotic with all of contact information, data, kind of like when when we sent out the original outreach material, this is strictly the results associated with all of our sites on the current active list. So this is round one from January 1 to June 30th. If you keep scrolling down, you can just see the concentrations of both lead on the right, which is the less than 0.001. That's in parts per million, and then same with copper on the left-hand column. That is also in parts per million. We're going to get to the point where there are detections of lead. That's starting with the 0.0012 or 1.2 parts per billion. And as you move further down that list of detections, we have one exceedance during round one. Now, to speak to that a little bit more, there is a follow-up protocol that we carry out as soon as we receive the report from the lab that we submit these samples to. If there is an exceedance beyond the 15 parts per billion of lead, we notify them within 24 hours. Not only that, but I get in touch with them. I have their contact information through the collection form that they fill out. And we schedule some follow-up sampling, not only from the same location that they sampled at, but more taps leading closer to their service line. So we can really dissect and diagnose where that source of lead is coming from. And this one, not going to name names or give their address by any means, but they sampled from the second floor bathroom tap. And it turns out that that fixture itself leached lead into the sample. And with the follow-up collections closest to the service line, it was non-detect. There was no source of lead near the service line. Another tap that was collected at that same site was actually tied to the original bathroom tap that they sampled at. That one also had a high detection of lead. And it's either that line of their internal plumbing or both fixtures themselves. Now, we don't know for sure, but there's nothing that we can do about that. We just have to notify them and hope that they take some sort of corrective action if they choose to do so. So that's round one. If you want to go to, actually, we can go back to the presentation.
Okay.
The pie charts are a good
Yes,
representation of,
they're real good.
yeah.
There you go.
So the above pie chart is round one, as you just saw. Round two is from July 1st to the end of this year. 60 samples for the top round, and then 61 for the bottom. The green are the non-detects, or anything below 1 part per billion. It was not detected at that level. There were 3 in round one that were less than 2 parts per billion, 4 that were between 2 to 5 parts per billion, and that 1 exceedance. There were no exceedances in round two. And this speaks to our corrosion control process, but also that we don't have, at least on our list, even with the galvanized service line locations that we're tackling, it is not a major concern. It is being reduced, I guess, in terms of the concentration, if there is any. All in all, I mean, with all of that said, corrosion control is not the end-all be-all solution to lead intrusion. And so we must rid the system of lead, galvanized steel, and brass components, because those are all of the pipe materials that will leach lead into your water. And it's very important to identify your own service line within your home, as well as the internal plumbing and fixture materials. You can carry out testing whenever you want, at any time you want. These people, lucky is the wrong word, because there's a reason why they're on our active list, but there's no cost to them to sample and do that. So next slide. So we'll get into the outreach process just a little bit more. So this is the initial letter that I send out to everyone on our active list. It is quite the endeavor to receive responses. Before, in years past, before I started, we would wait for the phone call. And then we would schedule a time to drop off the kit to them. They would do the collection, and then we would pick it up to submit it to the lab. I cut that part out and I just started dishing out these sample kits to people, and I would leave them on their doorstep after sending this letter. So I'll just pass this around. This is exactly what we give people. And we sit here and cross our fingers that they're willing to participate. If they don't, we send further outreach letters. If you want to click once more. So yeah, I bypass that a little bit. These are the sampling instructions that are included in this kit. And if you go one more, this is the collection form that I was referring to. So all of the questions that we ask are in relation to potential situations where lead could leach into the sample bottle. We just want to make sure that our sample pool is following the protocol correctly, make sure they're reading the instructions properly and carrying that out. But also we would like to know if there's any filtration in their home, and same with any repairs or adjustments to their internal plumbing within the past 10 years, because that could affect things as well. So this is the follow-up letter to relay their results to the homeowner themselves, which includes their lead concentration level as well as the copper within their drinking water. It gives a brief rundown of those concentrations and lists my contact information if they have any questions about that. But that's not the only letter that's included. If you want to click one more time, this further breaks down the health effects associated with lead, what their concentrations could mean if they're getting closer or exceeding the action level. So we're really hitting it home, all the information that they need to know as a homeowner, and just prompt them to reach out if they have any questions. So I already talked about following the exceedance. Right now, under the current rule, we have 3 days to notify the homeowner, but we've done it within 24 hours just to make sure they're aware as soon as possible. If you want to click once more. Yep, we can go on to the next slide. So that brings us to the lead and copper rule revisions, which actually took place in 2021. But now we're under improvements to those revisions starting November 30th last month, so very recent. It is a 600-page document that was published by the EPA, so this is still being reviewed even at the state level, and there's a lot of questions that come with this. But the biggest revision and the biggest component that we're looking out for, and that we already know what to expect, is this inventory of every pipe material, every service line throughout our entire system. Now, this is due by October 16th of 2024, and every system in the country needs to have this in. So with that, the service line is it's not just our responsibility, it's also the homeowner's responsibility on their side of the curb stop or the shutoff valve as well. So we need help from people to, identify the private side service lines. Another part of these revisions is the replacement of 100% of lead service lines, if there are any in your system, and galvanized requiring replacement within 10 years following this October 16 of 2024. With that, verification of 100% of the unknown service line materials within 10 years, addition of lead connectors to the service line inventory, improved tap sampling, which is an adjustment of that tiered approach that I talked about already. And then we're lowering the lead action level from 15 to 10 parts per billion, which, if you recall that whole table, we're nowhere near that, which is a good sign. And then additional outreach and filter distribution for systems with more than 3 action level exceedances in a 5-year period. there are some systems like Chicago that are really suffering from this. They have about 400,000 homes with lead service lines associated with them, and it'll cost about $8 billion to take care of all of those. So if you compare large systems like that, we're in pretty good shape, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And we'll move on from that.
Is it okay to ask a question?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Let's,
Save it
maybe,
till the end.
yeah, save at the end. and
Okay.
then- Because we may be able to answer your questions.
We'll go back to
but
it.
Circle back.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, so then that's kind of it for the lead and copper rule. I mean, as you can imagine, there's a lot more to that, but that was just the breakdown of it. So now we're into the free lead testing opportunity that we spoke about. This is our first time rolling out something like this. We had $2,500 dedicated to free lead testing for our customers. And I'll break down how that's going so far. So it started with the press release that was published in October 5th. And we pushed out more outreach following that press release. The Portsmouth Herald pushed out an article, city newsletters, and postcards. We printed about 2,000 of them, which were distributed at public facilities, and as well as the farmers market that Kim took care of. There were 38 responses to the outreach. People emailing me to ask what the next steps are. And only 17 out of those 38 have submitted their samples and received their results so far, which leaves 21 people that have not followed through with the collection process. So they're just sitting on their kits, which I'll pass this around as well. So it's a little different from the other kit that I passed around. Because we're only testing for lead and not copper, it's a smaller required sample volume, but also there's a lot more education material included in that kit as well. So we'll go to the next slide. So the whole breakdown of that process, people reach out to me through email. I look them up in our database to see what their service line material is. But also what type of property they have, whether that's single family, multifamily, the property age, see how they heard about the opportunity. And if everything checks out and they do fall within our system, then that's when I give them further instruction to go to the lab to pick up their sample kit. Because we only have so much money and we only have 100 samples that we can test with that money, we want to do it on a first come, first serve basis and make it fair for everyone. So it's going very well so far. But again, it's left to people to take that extra step to collect their sample and submit it. And just to top that off, it takes around 3 weeks to get their results back, just simply because the lab is very busy. And they're trying to juggle all of the testing that they have, on a day-to-day basis. So these are the results broken down into charts and graphs. So the results themselves in terms of lead concentration with the people who have collected and submitted their samples, you can see that the max concentration was 3.5 parts per billion. And the lowest, the majority of them were non-detect below 0.5 parts per billion, which is a very good sign. There were 6 detections, if you will, but 4 of those were below 1 part per billion. And when you talk about it in terms of just population, kids age 6 to 8 years old are most drastically affected by lead concentrations beyond 5 parts per billion. So these people were notified, they received their report. And again, if they have any questions, they can contact me directly. There's really nothing we can do beyond that in terms of the follow-up sampling and following some sort of protocol, but it's helpful for people to know. And again, these are collected at different locations within their home. They're not tied to the kitchen tap. And so the two, and that's kind of what is shown in the pie chart in the top right. The sample tap locations and kind of the percentages of the sample pool, the 17 participants of where they collected within their home. And that
Okay.
will wrap it up.
Yeah, we'll take some questions in a second. I wanted to add just a few things. Definitely kudos to Mason when he tells you in order to get participants, he's almost out there flagging people down, and that is.
I've had some help with Mariah.
And
as
Mariah
well.
too now has been awesome, but it's not easy. You know, this is, you know, you have to rely on the customer being willing to do it. Number one, they have to fit the category that they can be on your sample. Then they have to say, yes, I'll be a sampler. But one part that Mason didn't go into, because there's a lot more to this than just his summary, which has been excellent. But we have to then submit it to the regulators, and they have to approve it as a sample point. So it's not just, oh, thank you, 60 people, here's your bottles, fill them up. It's literally, these are the sample sites, and then DES has to officially, they send us a letter, or it's, you know, an email with a letter attached saying, you know, City Hall is now a sample site. That's not a good example because City Hall can't be, but these are residents that have to. So
And
you
the
know,
holding time for the sample is 14 days. So say someone collected their sample and they waited 13 days to reach out to me to pick up the sample, then we can't submit it to the lab because it's not acceptable at that point.
and a few, yeah,
There's some loops that you have to jump through to make sure that we meet the protocol and follow everything properly.
a few other things. I think at our next meeting, we're gonna come and describe what we're gonna do to finish our inventory. You know, this is a very old water system, and, you know, there's lots of pipe that's been in the ground for years. But there's only about 1,500 service lines that we don't know what they are. So we've narrowed it down. We're not near, you know, we have pretty good knowledge of that. So we're working towards getting that down. We also have, our meters are all inside buildings. So our meter crews for years have looked at the plumbing, you know, at the meter and what type of pipe is, you know, coming through somebody's, you know, from outside. So that's been an indicator to us to be able to help, you know, identify that. But again, we also need to know, you know, what to the curb stop. So the curb stop to our pipe is our service line, and everything past it is the customers. And so, you know, our plan is to really step up the outreach. So again, you know, when we have our next SWAG meeting, we'll be trying to advertise that here and let people know.
It's great.
Maybe
Sounds
some
good. Sure.
questions real quick. I know there was.
Sure. If you want to ask your question, go right ahead, sir.
Sure, but it was actually on an issue that was just touched on there as well. And I thought I heard you say that there were no lead service lines in Portsmouth. And I was.
As far as what we know right
Okay,
now.
I was surprised by
Yes.
that because I know that, you know, there's a lot of old construction here and I wasn't expecting to hear that. I have a friend who works for the Mass DEP and their drinking water contamination program in Boston. And she told me all about like what they're doing to do their inventories and stuff. So it's really, the other thing I thought I heard you say was that kids are most affected when lead levels are above 5 parts per billion, or kids of the age group. I didn't quite get that right.
Yeah, so
But I thought the literature actually said that any level of lead can result in poisoning or harm to kids.
yeah, I shouldn't have said that outright. Yeah, if you're below the age of 8 years old, you are more likely to be affected health wise. The health effects are much greater in terms of how drastic they are. But yeah, it's not just 5 parts per billion. I'm just basing that off of the literature of the whole protocol associated with lead testing and sampling in schools. So
So when there are pipes that are found that possibly contain lead, it looked like the other options were PEX, Flex, and PVC. So I know we're only talking about lead, but if you replace with those, do they leach compounds that we don't want to drink?
We're not sure about that yet. I have a feeling that in the future that is going to be a hot topic of conversation, just like lead. I mean, I think any metal, no matter how you break it down, if it's leaching into your drinking water depends on the concentration, but there's no material that is going to be perfect in terms of transporting water throughout a massive distribution system. I think as of right now, I haven't read any literature on some sort of microplastics being associated with HDPE piping, PEX as well. I mean, the topic of conversation, when you get into this whole topic of conversation about replacing lead components or galvanized components, I think people go straight to these materials, whether that's because they're easy to work with, and we know that there's not this drastic push for the replacement of those materials. I mean, it's kind of substituting the existing forefront issue with something that
We don't know about.
yeah.
And so
So
here's-
so we don't truly know. Yeah, but I think with these with everything at hand right now and with the corrosion control that we're doing on the front of treatment, it is clearly reducing that leaching and that corrosion of metals into the drinking water.
Well, when I was listening to you, I looked up the PEX and the PVC, and of course they're petrol products, which isn't a great thing. The Flex, one source I saw said that was more like stainless steel, which would be more inert. So I think it'd be worth it sort of looking into that a little bit, what the latest research says. And I know we aren't going to know now, but it's a lot of money to replace these materials to only have to do it again in 10 years when the next water substance is tested.
Good
for.
point, Kim. They are, I believe, most everything is, approved. There's, and you can't control what everybody does as far as, handyman type of work. We did run across this was a few years ago, a high sample. Come to find out, the person had done some plumbing, and what they used to solder the pipe was electrical solder, which has lead in it. So these are things, I mean, there's only so much, we can control. I mean, that's part of, the corrosion control program, which is to try to make the water as, stable as possible. I mean, this is what happened to Flint. Flint switched to a different water source altogether, and it caused, the pipes that for years had one type of water going through, it was changed to another almost immediately. They didn't even, they went from one day to the next, and then they had the, dirty water was first thing they had. And then of course that was indication of a release of, the lead.
I just mention it as a point of public education as we go forward. Have
Yeah, that's great.
another question?
Yeah, sure.
So when somebody's testing these fixtures in their house and they're older fixtures that have lead and that gets picked up, is that documented anywhere, like in the building files? So when, they do the environmental site assessments or when they do realty deals, people can say, look, this has already been replaced. Somebody replaced this bathroom. It's not an issue.
I mean, in short, no, it's not documented exactly where they're collecting from. In terms of what I'm paying attention to are these external factors that could contribute to the result of that lead or copper concentration. So like kind of to speak to what Brian said, not every case is the same, but we're trying to control that in terms of our sampling pool. Yeah, again, when you're talking about residential properties, I mean, that information only goes so far in terms of what we can distribute to the public. We're not going to tell the public that the X amount of people, X amount of residential properties have these fixtures within their home. But I think hitting that home is really, it's really important for the homeowner to know what type of materials those are made out of. Same with their internal plumbing and their service line.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep.
And if I could, one more.
Yep.
So is the lab batching tests, or as they come in, they'll do one, if just one comes in that day, they'll do it that day?
Yeah, so it depends on how it always starts well. With the initial outreach letter, we'll get a batch of maybe like 20 samples. But then it immediately phases out to where we're getting like 2 to 3, maybe 1 at a time. And so we're trying to track all of that and just make sure that we're getting closer to the 60 number of samples that are coming in. But yeah, we submit them, again, we're tied to that holding time with the sample. So even if they collect it that day and I go to pick it up from them that day, it's my responsibility to get it to the lab within 14 days. So, yeah.
I just have 2 quick questions. In terms of the people from the free lead testing that expressed interest, you sent kits, but you haven't gotten anything back from them yet. Have you done any additional follow-up with those folks?
No, and that
Okay.
is the plan. We are gonna reach out to those people. Yeah,
Okay, great.
because it's also not fair if we do get to the, 90, closer to the 100
Right.
mark and people are still sitting on their samples. We
Right.
want to make sure that they're carrying that out.
Right. And then I think the last one's just a comment. I wonder if trying to advertise this through the city neighborhood groups too, that might be another way to get the word out. So it's just a thought that I had.
Definitely, yeah.
Do you have a question, Jim?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I was just wondering, the new law, I understand it's from the water main to the curb stop. That's in the program to replace if it's a problem.
Mhm.
And how about from the curb stop to the water meter in the customer's house?
Yeah, so that's a hot topic of conversation right now. Who's paying for it is the question. Right now, it's the homeowner. I mean, it is the homeowner's responsibility to take care of that section of their service line.
Okay.
There is a lot of talk, and we just met with someone from the state actually yesterday, who said that there is gonna be grant money available, for us to cover a portion of the replacement if that's necessary.
Our, yeah, and our intent, so after we do the inventory sometime next year, we'll be, bringing the information both here and to city council, and we'll have a plan. And that may include, some of the grant monies, hopefully, from the state, so that would help offset some costs, and there may be some cost sharing and we'll see.
Yeah, lots to talk about on that front in terms of,
I was just curious, currently, if Portsmouth replaces the service line from the main to the curb stop, what material do they use?
copper.
Is it copper?
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so going forward, your program's gonna start identifying all galvanized service lines? Because you said you don't have any lead, or you're not aware of any.
Yeah, we're gonna tackle the unknowns first, which, like he said, there's about 16 to 1700 unknowns right now, out of the 8400 service connections that we have. So there are different forms of inspection under this new revision. One is visually,
Yeah.
but you also have to have proof through either old documentation through tie cards. Same with property age and kind of, there's a few more that I'm drawing a blank on right now, but you have to prove out what you know and what you don't.
Right.
So yeah, and then with that comes the whole replacement plan and also, tackling it from there, and there's a percentage. So not just galvanized, we're trying to identify every form of material and every component of the distribution system. That's the whole point of the revision, and that's not just our system, that's every system across the country,
Yeah.
including places like New York City and Boston and,
And we'll be out there digging up. That's the last resort. We'll have to go down to the curb stop, and if we can get on it with our Vector truck and be able to, dig a hole down there, we'll be doing that. And you have to
Wow,
pretty much
that could be a
confirm.
ton of work.
It will be.
yeah.
Yep.
And I'm sure it's possible, sometimes not, but to go in the basement and look at the pipe as it comes through the
Yep,
basement wall.
That's what but then that doesn't fully tell us, you know,
Right.
at the curb stop,
Yes.
what's
don't
on
know.
our side,
Mhm.
so.
So the meter crew is out there doing that right now. Anytime they do a change out of the water meter, that's what they're looking for. And then we document it and it goes into our database. We have a whole map that is going to be published come that time frame. And anyone can go on and look to see what their material is. But it is going to be another collaborative effort on behalf of homeowners to one, let us into their home, and two, to yeah, basically help us in this endeavor to identify everything.
So Laurel is asking, is information about the free lead testing available in languages other than English? Are there many homes in Portsmouth where English is not first language spoken? So.
The first question is no, not right now, but that is a good point to consider.
Maybe Kim could help us a bit. Do you
Uh,
know other languages and how much outreach you're probably the health department?
I know that we can get translation services and
If I may, if we have the text on the postcards on the website.
Mhm.
Our website translates.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah.
and-
So in
but
that
yes, we
case, they can select that. Yeah.
And as far as homes, I don't know about single family homes. I know that we do have diversity in Portsmouth with several families that speak English as a second language, so it's worth looking into that.
Okay.
All right.
I just had two questions. Are the unknown lines in a certain part of Portsmouth or just kind of all over?
It's scattered, but it's not, how do I answer that question? I would have to look directly at the map, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't know exactly. They're not exactly hotspots, no. Because also when you're going in to do work in terms of replacing a whole water main, they're able, at that point, you know, the distribution crew is able to check off the boxes of more than one service line if there's more than one connected to that main that they're replacing. So that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, there's hotspots of Portsmouth. Technically, like State Street and downtown area will probably be more susceptible to the unknowns just because of everything being compressed into a small area. It's harder to get underneath
Sure.
the roads and stuff like that. So it's a difficult question to answer.
And then I just had another detailed question is, are any of the folks for the testing program responding like, well, I'm kind of interested, but we filter our water anyway, so we don't need to.
I've gotten maybe one or two questions about that, you know, and I tell them it's totally up to them because it's on a first come, first served basis. They are able to participate. And we're not biased to that. Or are you referring to the free lead testing or
Yes.
are you?
Yeah,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
yeah. So with the lead and copper rule, it's a little different. I wouldn't be able to rope them into that sample pool if they have whole home filtration. Same with point of use. We'd rather avoid that.
Yeah.
So the testing that you're offering, if I'm a renter, can I
Yes.
participate?
Yeah, it's one per building, and it's also not just the homeowner's call, it can be the tenant. And we talked about this, that can get a little dicey.
And any customer, so if you're a Greenland customer, you know, Newcastle.
Yeah, so that was
And,
something else I should have mentioned. Pretty much every sample that has come in so far, and there needs to be a correction on the outreach side, as they live in Portsmouth. They don't live in Greenland or a portion of Rye or Madbury or.
I think our intent will be after the next year when we do our next round of outreach is to try to reach those other customers too.
Mhm.
Well, for Laurel's point, I think that it might be good to work with the school department on outreach because their language department and their IT department had great records when we were doing COVID outreach. And that might be an important.
Perfect transition,
Perfect
isn't it?
segue.
So we just,
Well,
wow,
trying
we-
to gauge, trying to
Hold
gauge
it,
the number of
we'll let
families that are,
Zach, you and
Come to
Ken
the
come
table.
on up,
Village.
please.
I know we have at the moment, I think we have 75 students who are second language English speakers. So if you take that, extrapolate that from our, it's probably 2% of our population. So if that's representative of the rest of the state, it might not be. But it gives you an idea. And if we can talk to you about languages that those.
We'll welcome you to our meeting again. We'll let you
Yes.
introduce yourselves again and then we can pull your presentation up.
Sure thing. So Zach McLaughlin, Superintendent of Schools.
Ken Hunchy, Director of Building and Grounds, Portsmouth Schools.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
You want me to pull your?
Yeah, if you
presentation up
could, that
here?
would be
All
great.
right,
We might as well
we'll get
jump
right
into
to
what
it, sure.
got us on your radar screen.
Let's,
I don't know if I don't see it up there. Hang on. And it didn't come as a PowerPoint, but as a Google slide deck.
okay.
So it should be, I think there was a link in that probably email around 6 o'clock to you guys. If folks are interested, I also have paper copies I can slide.
Lead testing
So-
Portsmouth schools.
There we
There you go. Perfect.
All right, well, let me.
Not as fancy as what you guys got before, but that's all right.
me
It's the core
share
information across.
Screen,
So you're going, let's see.
hang on. I am not. I have too many windows open.
Well,
Here we go.
I screwed you up by not using, there we go.
Let's give you your slideshow. Okay.
Great,
All right.
awesome.
Yes.
So within the last week or so, we sent out information to the school community around the latest round of lead testing that we had completed. So if you go to that first slide, I can just kind of take you through some of the regulatory piece on this. So New Hampshire in 2018 established that schools needed to be testing on a regular cycle for to look at lead. It originally starts in 18 and that bill's updated in 2022. And basically what ends up happening is that all schools and licensed childcare, so this is not optional like homeowners. This is like, we're going to do it. And we're going to do it in a cycle of 3. Now, this was at the same time this was happening around the region. There was a lot of conversation around some of the adjustments around some of the expectations. So I was in Vermont at the time, and we in 2019 passed a similar bill, but our timeline was much shorter. We didn't get a number of years to go through multiple rounds of testing. We were game on at 4 parts per billion. But anyways, the expectations as part of this bill were that schools would be testing 3 times from the passage of the bill through 2024, and there had to be 6 months between tests. You had some flexibility about when those tests were going to occur. The initial tests, which were part of the first passage of the bill, were at the EPA level, action level of 15 parts per billion. And then as testing went on in July of 2022, there was a move to adjust that down to the 5 parts per billion number. The school district in June of 29 conducted its first round of tests under this bill. And I think the next slide gives you kind of a breakdown of what was seen when that occurred. So at each of the different schools on the left, you have the number of water outlets that were tested. Now, these are drinking fountains, these are kitchen sinks, these are classroom sinks. These don't include things like utility sinks in a custodian's closet
Or bathrooms where they just wash their hands.
or bathrooms where it's just hand washing. So this includes just those other items. This was a breakdown at that time of the of where things lied. Things that are BRL are lower than what the instrument can register in terms of an amount of lead. The testing regimen is very similar to what was just discussed before. The conversation around the expectation is instead of 6 hours for us is the TAP sit for at least 8 hours, but our And that was a heavy focus, and I'll come back to that and our current concern that we have about our second set of tests. But this is where we at. We had one outlet that was at actionable level at the 15 parts per billion for 2019. It was a sink that was in a music classroom at New Franklin School. The remediation was to simply, that sink is no longer there. It was removed at that time. We did have, but I did want to recognize, Andrew and I were talking about this before, about the school had made statements about in 16 or 17 about we have a no tolerance for lead. You know, I just wanted to point out that institutionally, it appears to me, without going back and talking to people who were making decisions at the time, basically the decision-making process was they were going to take action at the actionable level. But there was not action taken at other levels where lead was detected from 2019. This is the next set of results. I think the next slide has. So here's where we are, and then I'm going to show you what we sent, because a lot of this is hot off the presses type of testing data for us, and we are in the midst of testing. If we want to explore this a little bit, because we have some skepticism about some of the readings we got this time, but you can see we're up across the board. At the same time, we are the actionable level from the state has been reduced to 5 parts per billion. So everything in those two columns would be part of that based on this first sample we did. I want to show you, we don't have to go through every single one, but we'll kind of, if we could just kind of flip through. Oh, first of all, I'm sorry. This is what the state asked us to do. We received back this notification. Each of our schools got individual letters on the 29th of November. Basically that anything that was above the limit, we needed to either block access to, one or two things. We would bag it with a plastic bag and wrap it up. Or if some sinks were for hand wash, we would have a sign for hand washing only, but those would be classroom sinks where teachers would have the ability to monitor. So that was done as soon as we got back that information from the state. We also needed to communicate to parents and guardians about each individual outlet that had tripped that new 5 parts per billion standard, or newer, let me say that, not brand new, within 5 business days. That's what led to the communication we pushed out, which is based on a template from the state. We also need to create a remediation plan around each of those outlets. We need to submit that remediation plan. Then we have to go ahead and remediate. In most cases, the first step is to pull out the faucet itself, replace with something else, and then test again. And then be in a position where we would be at least under the actionable level before we would put something back into use. If you go ahead, so these are the ones that tripped the 5 parts per billion samples. So what you're going to see on each of these is you have the school listed, the location of the actual outlet, the reading from 2019, and I want to show you this because there's a trend that is leading to our questioning of stuff. And then the most current sample from June of this, this would be of August of this year, and then what our planned remediation is for the state. So this is at Lister Academy. So just to go through this one. Oh, sorry, go back just the one, I apologize. So in 2019, it was 1.3 parts per billion. And then in the sample that was taken this August, it was 41 parts per billion. If we go ahead, again, at the middle school, we had 1. So the one was previously didn't register anything that was readable, and then a 9.9 parts per billion in this particular sample. And again, it would be a fixture replacement as part of it. Go ahead. You'll see similar, each individual one is less important than just the trend. And again, I'm not showing you all the fixtures. Things that did not register over 5 are not appearing here. We tested 141 different outlets. We're just showing the ones that came through with this set of samples at over 5. But you'll notice that we're talking not that long a period of time where we had multiple samples from previously that were under a readable level and now are, above 5. And we have some healthy skepticism about some of this stuff. Go ahead. And you'll just see some of the same trends. One more time. The two schools that had the most that were identified were Dundero School, Dundero Elementary, and then Little Harbor. And if you go again, and let's go, we can just move right through to, I'll tell you when to stop. So on the heels of this, if you go ahead one more. So what I asked, one of the things we want to do is, before we move immediately into the states, like, okay, start your remediation right away, we want to retest our samples. And part of the reason why I want to retest those samples is our original samples were done in June during the school year. Our facilities team, what they did was we would come in early in the morning to get that first flush opportunity. And that gave us the opportunity on our state. The state recommendations are between 8 and 18 hours, I believe it is, for us to take a sample. So we went ahead, we did that. It was during the school year. The second sample, to make the logistics of taking the tests easier, we sampled in the middle of August before students returned to school. The concern that I have about this set of samples is that in a lot of cases, those taps sat for a long time. And so if you go and look at, and I don't have it here, but if you go and look at the kind of EPA kind of recommendations around testing, they speak specifically around school testing about avoiding right after like a week-long school vacation, even weekends, that you want to have movement in that water so that you're taking an apples to apples sample. In terms of our own methodology, I don't think that we did that. Now, what Ken and I talked about was, let's do right away. We're going to do full scale retesting, but right away, what can we do to start to test that hypothesis that perhaps our methodology influenced our results? And so I had him test. We had 5. He just did. And we just got back this set of results this afternoon. So I haven't even shared this with the school board yet. You guys are getting the hottest stuff. So in terms of this sample, it was very similar, which is actually disappointing. So the test that we did at New Franklin on one of the bubblers was 13 as opposed to 11. The nurses sink was within a tenth of a part per billion. So that's New Franklin. If you can go ahead one more. This was the biggest difference, the Dundero, but this is still well above the 5 parts per billion measurement, but radically different measurement in terms of that. That one, move ahead again. These again, one very similar, one very different. We're still not sure what to make of our own, in all honesty, our own samples. And I think I really appreciated our conversation on that Saturday about, well, geez, do you think it's the best idea to just start remediating if you're not 100% sure about, your set of samples already? Because if you go ahead and remediate and then you have better results in the back end, you're not going to be sure whether it was your samples or your remediation, right? So I'll let Ken talk a little bit about kind of, for us now, what are our next steps and what are we looking to do?
Yeah, so our steps now is we are meeting with a local contracted plumber tomorrow to go over New Franklin School on repiping potentially the bubbler and the nurses sink. Hopefully the time frame for them will work during Christmas break. But to look at Little Harbor as a whole, we're going to look down to the branch line and to where the main is just after the water meter, and try to take some samples into our main service as it branches out throughout the school, so we can try to identify where it may be leaching or where it's not. So then we can put a remediation plan ahead on Little Harbor School. If we're going to be repiping all the classrooms, or is that going to just direct us to the fixtures? So that's the meeting that we have tomorrow. And then on Saturday morning, this coming Saturday, we have a crew coming in. I just met with the testing company again today. to solidify, another 140 samples so that we can start to resample and everything that we've sampled already. So we're gonna resample the entire 140 samples again, and get that to the lab. And that the time frame of them turning around 140 samples similar to the first round. So that's our plan of attack. Also with Lister Academy, we will look at also repiping into the kitchen. We've already replaced that fixture and we still had a hit. It just said a fixture actually broke, so we had to change it out in the last week and a half, the gooseneck, just because of usage and things like that. So we already had that scheduled for repair, and then that test also came back somewhere. So that's where we are with the repairs. And with middle school, we have fixtures being replaced, even though we're going to test it, but it's just one fixture into an area there. So we're just going to go ahead and swap that one right out. But the biggest attack plan is once we understand where Little Harbor is on this next test this coming week, of where we'll put out our action plan and where we will be at. But all sinks have been labeled hand washing, and majority of all the classroom sinks, that's what they are, because we do have bottle filtrations throughout all our schools. Just about every single bubbler is swapped out to an bottle fill station, except for some remaining ones that we have isolated through the areas or been discontinued. That will be swapping those out very shortly.
And those water filling station units have filtration.
They filter units. So no matter if they bend over and get a drink or they put their bottle in, it's filtered before it goes through the device. They're all LK bubblers throughout the district.
I'm sure, I know there's lots of questions, so
Sure, yes.
Kim, if you want to go ahead and start.
I'm wondering if the difference between the lowered limits at earlier testing is that we just can get to better detection now. Is that?
I can't speak to, I would just say, looking at the data tables, I mean, I can definitely see where in 19, the lowest levels that you would see, at least in our stuff, was a 1, was the lowest. Now you can see like you can get like a 0.46 or something. And that's just me. I don't know, you guys might be able to speak better to sampling.
Yeah, I asked our lab about this because sometimes you do see variability in data. And I think it comes down to the method that they're using within the lab. When you get to lower reporting limits within a lab space, it requires a lot more attention to detail. They add a plasma to the sample itself, which breaks apart all the ions within that water sample. And then the machine that they run it through is able to pick up on those ions specifically to lead. And so there's a very certain and specific way of doing that through a machine. But the introduction of the plasma is the first step. Whereas before, when you're reporting at higher levels and limits, it's not as meticulous.
So I made a list of questions, and one was, why are the levels higher now than they were in 2019? And I think the position right now is that, potentially it's because of the timing of the sampling. So, the other tests, 2019 tests were taken when the school was more active, and the 2020. So I'm just asking this for clarifying for the public's sake. So that's.
And I think I want to be really clear. That's just a hypothesis based on what we've seen so far.
Okay. And then also a question that I asked you when we spoke on the phone was, if these samples were collected in August, why was the school community not notified until November? So I'm wondering if because some of these levels are high and people could have been drinking them. So what can we do to make sure that this information gets out sooner next time?
Yeah. So the short version is we went back and forth from the lab to the state, the lab to the state.
So when we dropped off 140 samples, it takes the lab some time to get it. When we reached out back to the lab and said, we haven't received our samples, they said they did send them to us, which we don't have any documentation of. I immediately got them that day. We sent them out to the state. The state then replied back to us saying they're in the wrong format. You need to submit them in this format. We went back to the lab. That took the lab another time frame to get that back out. As soon as the state notified us of where our raw data came into the legislative Park Pavilion, we immediately then acted on and got that notification out to the parents and took our corrective actions right then and there.
Okay. But there was 3 months in between.
Yes,
Yeah.
yep.
And so I'm just wondering, like Mason, you talked about a 24-hour note, the lab has to give a
Mhm.
notification. How do we make sure moving forward that, like, to me, the lab should have called the school immediately, right? When they got those results and said, hey, you have a hit of 180 in a nurse's office, or they may not have known that part. But anyways,
Right.
there were like some really high levels. So was that on the lab to call the school directly and say, we
They
have
should have
these-"
actually sent the result directly to the state, not to us.
Okay,
And that's the fault of the lab. Like these last 5 results that we just did, took them 8 days to turn around just these 5 results.
okay.
And original round was 140 of them.
Mhm.
And so that's the corrected action we've talked with the lab, is that you can send it to us, but they have to go in this format and they have to go directly to the state.
Mhm.
So we're hopefully that is corrected now as we move through this next phase.
Okay. Yeah, I think too, that would be something that would be helpful to know as retesting happens, how quickly will you get the data back? And then, you know, to me, there is some ownership on the lab too, to notify
Mhm.
you all.
Sure.
For sure.
I can speak to that a little bit. There's no requirement on behalf of the lab reaching back out unless you're paying more money to expedite those samples. But if you're dealing with a lab that is handling hundreds and hundreds of samples from every which way,
Mhm.
they're done on a first come, first served basis, and they're not always going to reach out to you right away. Sometimes being in my position, I have to reach out and basically ask for that data and see if they've maybe forgot about it because I haven't received the report yet.
Mm.
And that does happen.
Mhm.
Especially with a large batch of samples, when you submit them all at once, they want to get all of them on one report. Sometimes that requires several rounds of testing on that same batch.
Mhm.
So that you're kind of at the mercy of the workload of the lab. And that's,
But if they get I don't, does a lab know that this is like a drinking water sort? When they get a sample, do they know
Yes.
what it's coming from and what it's for?
yeah.
Yes.
So I wonder, you know, with the lab, should there be some more ownership on them if they know this is a drinking water source for people, especially children at a school? Is there, you know,
Well,
I'm just wondering if there should be,
with this
we should-
whole Get the Let Out program, there's a list of labs that people are given in terms of which is accredited and where they send their samples to. Every school across the country is doing that
Mhm.
with the same labs. So I think they understand how pressing it is. It's just it's a timing thing.
Mhm.
You can't get it all done overnight.
Sure.
And that's the problem.
yeah.
Question on that?
If it's related to this particular
Yeah,
topic, sure.
no, absolutely. So I'm having trouble understanding the timeline on the 3 months and then calling and then it being like on the wrong form or having to be submitted with what you said earlier, that a sample is only good for like 10 days or something like that. I don't want to say that wrong, but was the water tested and then they just couldn't give the data and it took 3 months to get the data? That seems crazy. Or is this a situation where the tests themselves on the samples weren't done for a prolonged period that may have invalidated the results?
You do have 14 days to test the sample, but they can receive samples. I guess the 14-day is for submittal and you're hoping that they're going to test it as soon as they receive it. In some cases, when they have this backload of work, they can preserve the samples. And so at that point, your holding time is extended. And so I think you run into that. Sometimes it can strictly be on the reporting side where they're already sitting on the data, but they have a lot of other reports that they're pushing out and they don't get to yours that day. So that's also what you're at the mercy of in terms of not only staffing and in comparison to the workload, but you just have to follow up sometimes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But that is an interesting question. Do you know, you collected the sample in August. Do we know when the lab actually processed the sample? Like,
I
was
can
it pretty
check with-
immediate? It was
well,
just,
We dropped them off within the following day. So if I took the
Mhm.
samples this morning, I would drop them off by that afternoon.
Mhm.
So I would have to look at the report to see if they do put it. I don't think there is a timestamp on when they
Right.
process it on it.
Right.
I'll review the report. but
Yeah, I'm
we-
curious if there was like a long time between them actually running the
Yeah.
testing it.
we
So,
Drop off, all the results that we've done, they're within 24 hour back to them. So there's
Mhm.
no question of sitting in a pickup or sitting in an office.
sure.
We
Okay.
want to flip them right around back to the lab.
Okay, great. One of the other questions I had was around the fountains in the schools. Are they all filtered? You mentioned the LK filters, right?
Yes.
I know quite most of the bubblers at the schools have those LK filters, but some didn't. So the ones that aren't, like, are you gonna replace every fountain, bubbler with these LK filters?
Yes.
Okay, so there'll be no more old fountains
No, these are
whatsoever?
The old ones, like in the gymnasium, for instance, there's 2 old
Mhm.
bubblers. The kids don't actually use them besides putting trash and things like that. So those will get removed out of service.
Okay,
But any other ones that we have, and we've been doing that over the last 5 years, are replacing 3 to 4 bubbler with AK water fillers in all our schools over the last 4 years. So
okay.
we only have, I think there's 6 left to do district wide.
Okay, and those were tested as part of this program and they were all non-detect for lead, or was there,
Except for
One, I wanted to correct, because it was something I said last night to the school board, is my understanding was it was all of them, we had one. that
one,
did
and what
test.
was the
there's
level?
one at New Franklin that we just retested. It's in the report right now.
But it's an LK station and there is lead in it still?
It still came back as positive, yes.
Do you know what the level was
Um,
without me combing through maybe?
It's in the second to last page.
Okay. Another question I had was you talked about the bill that was passed in July of 2022 that lowered the standard to 5.
Mhm.
So did the state require the school, or was there an initiative? Because we know from 2019, there were many hits at 5 or, so yeah, was there in 2022 when that passed, was there any efforts or initiative to go back and look at the sites that would have now been in violation of the 5 to take them
And
offline? or-
I don't know the answer to that. So I'm still recreating the history on
Mhm.
this one. The beginning of my involvement starts, about a week and a half ago. So I don't know what was done in the interim. And I can't speak to the state's expectation of that 2019 sample. And at the time of the 2022 change, was there an expectation that the district went back to reexamine that sample at that time? I
Mhm.
don't know the answer to that question right now.
Okay.
So.
Another question I have is around Dondero. I know there was a lot of detections there, but that school recently in the last few years underwent significant renovations. So were pipes part of the renovations?
No, just all
Okay.
fixtures only. I mean,
Okay,
some limited piping in the 4th, 5th grade wing, because we removed that whole structural wall. If
okay,
you remember Don Derry, you had to walk through the classrooms to get down to the classrooms, and we relocated the structural wall. So there was some piping replaced, but not a full
okay,
infrastructure replacement.
okay.
I had a question to follow up on that. Did
Yeah.
you retest those locations that were attached to that replaced plumbing?
So all that testing was done. So Don Derry renovation was 2017 and 18. And so then
Oh,
we
so it was
started our
bef-
testing.
It was
yes.
all in that 19.
Yeah, so then our testing came 19 and then our testing as of now.
Okay.
I believe your email had said that Lister Academy was on bottled water.
On a bubbler,
Or-
go ahead, you.
A Poland
Yeah.
Spring bottle station.
Was that
Okay.
because of this or
Nope,
something
it's-
else?
It's just been their process since they moved it into the facility back in 2000.
Okay,
They've just always had that. It's in the cafeteria and the gymnasium cafeteria.
okay,
And that's where staff and students have always filled their water bottle station.
okay,
I believe it's this process they had when they were at Jones School out to the Pease Air Force Base.
okay,
And they just have continued that since they're there.
okay. Will more frequent testing be done now, because of all these detections? Does the sampling plan change? I know that the school is taking the initiative to retest to see if you can confirm these results, but as you know, once you have this many detections in various locations, do you have to then test every few months now, or is there any change to the
I'm
protocol of
not
testing?
aware within the statute whether or not that then it changes the pace at which we're supposed to test. I think we might have an interest as an institution regardless
Mhm.
to do that. But I think, first, I think the first thing for us is this next, tomorrow is another round of testing. It's like, let's better understand where we think we're actually at.
Mhm.
Then let's remediate. And then again, where we, at that point, and my commitment to the school board is once we're going to take all the steps to get under actionable levels.
Mhm.
Once we get to that point, if we're still looking at lots of outlets that continue to have 2 parts per billion, or that's, then it's like coming back to them to talk about, okay, look, this is what we're going to need to do. Here's the potential impact on operations in order to do that. What do you think is appropriate as a board in terms of steps to go forward? First, we got to get through this next chunk and see where we're at.
Okay. Kim, did you have a question? Oh, I thought I saw you was in your hand. Okay. Any other additional questions?
You did mention this is not unique to Portsmouth. The schools
No,
throughout
this
New
is-
Hampshire are.
And then that was one, and I think some people took exception to, I took the state template, I did add a sentence or two, and I did include the fact that this is happening all over the state. We have, one, larger district that will remain nameless, who they're in the midst of doing 250 plus switch outs of outlets. So, and that's not, I think too, if you want a context, if citizens want a context, when I say that, the information we put out includes a link to Get the Lead Out New Hampshire, which gives all the data from all the different schools, and it gives you an opportunity to look at, be like, what within the context of what else is happening around the state. I think it shows you very quickly that Portsmouth is not unique in trying to deal with this particular situation.
And related a little bit, Kim suggested we resample our bubblers here. 'Cause
And I
we
did.
we have 3 of them, and Mason did, and
All below 1 part per billion.
yeah,
Are they the LK stations? Like at the
They are
schools?
not filtered.
we don't filter. They're
Nope.
just
Okay,
regular.
The police department does have filters on their water bubblers, but
okay.
no.
So if these results are confirmed and there are some locations that are quite high, is there any efforts or initiatives to offer blood testing or to educate the school community to say, here's the risk with lead exposure? And the other, like, reaching out to pediatricians to let them know that, some kids may have drank water with high levels of lead, et cetera.
Yeah, we're right in the infancy of that conversation, but I think our intent is to be transparent with the community, to educate where it's appropriate, and to take whatever steps we need to in order to make sure we're doing what we need to keep our student body, healthy.
Mhm.
So, but again, we're in the very earliest stages of those conversations and trying to even conceptualize what that might look like.
Okay. How are you planning to, it sounds like there's lots of work ahead, sampling, remediation, thinking about more communication with people if needed. So how are you planning to update this information? Would it be through the school board? Would it be helpful for you to come back here?
We're happy to come back here. I mean, our plan, my commitment to the board was, is as we go through work, we're going to continue to keep the board updated in each phase as we go.
Okay.
And then and at the same time, then we would be communicating out more broadly to our stakeholders.
Okay.
So, and that would go through similar types of message blasts, similar to what we announced when we did the initial announcement, to push out to everybody.
Okay. This is a question I think for Mason, but related to this is, obviously there's a big initiative for lead, particularly under the Biden administration. There's lots of federal dollars around lead. Are there any resources that you're aware of that the school board could tap into to help offset some of the costs of remediating these fixtures, or just the extra testing that has to go on? Are we aware of anything, or even at the state level, that could help pay for some of this?
Personally, I'm not aware
Okay.
of that. With New Hampshire, it's kind of a special case where they're responsible for all of the sampling and testing involved in the schools throughout Portsmouth, and that goes for every school system throughout the state. The public water system is not responsible for that, so I haven't done the research in terms of seeing, what grant money is available for Portsmouth schools. But I'm sure that's a quick call away.
And there
I think
is.
There is money.
There is some funds there. We just have to establish what our costs are, and then we put it in their format. And it's just a matter of whether we qualify or not. There's a small pool, it's not a lot of money
Okay.
that's available to all New Hampshire schools.
I was gonna say, when I talked about before that, when I went through this previously, across the Connecticut River, Vermont started the same thing when 4 parts per billion didn't go through rounds of testing. They said 2019, right now, we're testing.
Mhm.
You need to hit 4 parts per billion right now. And then there was corresponding, it was basically like on a per, you need to switch out a faucet, this is your reimbursement from the state. You need to switch out a line, here's your reimbursement from the state,
Okay.
a bubbler, it was all, there's not a similar, there's not similar money connected to this mandate in New Hampshire.
I see.
So there's a pool, but we're all fighting for the same pool.
Okay.
It's not on a per remediation basis.
Okay.
So
I see another question in the back.
Well, I was just gonna comment that the 2016, the original legislation did provide for free testing. It's been in place since 2016. And I don't know the status of what the DES is doing today, but I know in Massachusetts and the EPA is throwing money at this issue, and
Mhm.
you should definitely reach out to them, because I think the resources are there to reimburse you for this. And if they're not there this year, you're gonna have grants coming the next year, because that's why the EPA is nationwide requiring all of the states to reassess their lead line, their lead service lines and other things like that.
Mhm.
The states are in the process of doing it. I know Massachusetts is already.
Okay.
So one point that's not touched on is, these samples are first draw, so,
Mhm.
I know back in 91, the original, if you had lead, it was to let your faucet, even the guidance from water systems was, let your faucet run till it was cold. So, in a certain sense, we are, the sampling is to capture the worst case scenario. So not every glass of water that's pulled out of, a tap, but sequentially, there have been samples too, that like, if it is in the plumbing further down the line, you could have samples that go up, but most of them, if it's at the fixture, it's gonna be that first draw has the highest because it sat there, and then it comes down, but
Mhm.
again, the goal is to, have none.
I should have spoke to that too. So with some of these concerning levels of lead within our lead and copper rule program and doing the whole follow-up process, sampling from the same location, I have them run the tap for 30 seconds. And majority of the time, it's non-detect
Mhm.
after that 30 seconds, if it is the fixture itself. But if it's the plumbing, like he said, it can become much more of a bigger issue.
Mhm.
Because you're pulling that lead from a further extent of the line, whether that's from solder, the pipe itself, a connector, it comes to the sample, so.
Mhm. Okay. I think the last thing I'll just ask, you touched upon it a little bit, but the former superintendent was quoted in the newspaper saying we have a no tolerance policy for lead. And, for me personally, as someone who's learned a lot about lead and through this group and have little kids, there is no safe level of lead for children. So it is my hope that the school would continue to take a no tolerance policy to lead. And, as you move forward with your plans and your retesting and thinking ahead, even the ones below 5, as a parent, I would appreciate if those are remediated. But I certainly know that you're still figuring all that out. I would like to see that philosophy of no tolerance to lead continue throughout the city of Portsmouth.
yeah, and I think, as I said on the phone, I'm not a pro lead guy, but I think, when I think about when that quote was made on behalf of the school district, that was pre-2019 testing, and I think the institution took the position that a no tolerance for lead was no tolerance for actionable levels of lead. So what I want to make sure is, because like I said, I did go through this in Vermont, is that we had to chase, once we got down below, for us, 4 parts per billion, it was really difficult to be able to be in a position to be like, there's no readable levels of anything anywhere. And I don't know that I'm trying to think, in the district that I was in, I think we got awfully close. But I still think we ended up with a tap or two where it was like 1 part per billion, 2 part per billion. And that was with remediation on lines, that was multiple fixture changes, that was on-site filtration. I mean, we put a lot of money into it and it had a lot of state funding to assist us. And so that's the only reason why I've been hesitant around. I don't want to make a commitment that I can't absolutely guarantee I can hit. And I'm gonna need school board support in order to be in a position to take some of the additional steps that would be necessary to go beyond the actionable level. And I need to have them weigh in order to get
Sure,
in that
I
position.
understand. Kim,
Well, just to follow up on that point, public health is about prevention. And we already know that we have a much reduced rate of blood testing in children here in Portsmouth. It's an artifact from COVID and some national recall and blood testing kits over the years. But I think that we need to assume there's already a level of exposure to children that we don't know about.
That's a good
And
point.
so anything we can do to reduce any possible exposure will probably be beneficial.
Agreed.
Well, with that, thank you very much, both of you, for coming
thank
out
you.
tonight. I really
Appreciate it.
appreciate
Coming.
it. Let's stay in touch,
Yeah.
how the best way that makes sense for that. We do have a school board member who's on our swag. She's not here tonight, Elizabeth Barrett. So we can potentially
That's great.
find ways to share
Yep.
information that way and figure out the best way to stay in touch.
And
with
that may change as we move into January and the board reorganizes.
Okay,
So we'll see, but you'll have somebody from the board who will remain part of the group.
okay, that sounds great. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys very
Good
much.
night. Thank you. Appreciate your time. All right. Thank you, Brian, for all your technology assistance. I
Yeah.
don't envy you,
Still
and I really
fairly
appreciate it.
miserable.
We
Thank
can
you
call
for
him
using-
Vanna.
Uh,
This is a lot. You're going through a lot. So,
Yeah, well, it's,
so many presentations.
there we go. And I'll be quick. So, water supply update, abbreviated, we do have the third quarter, supply update on the website. And basically summarizing, the highlights are always to say how we're doing on supply and quality, no violations, and production was, and that's how much water we put into the system, well below the 10-year historic average. And precipitation was above average, and we continue to be in a wet cycle, which is pretty well demonstrated by these two graphs. The one on the left shows the river levels at the Oyster River, which we use to track the Bellamy, very similar watershed. And the green is average, and these are average flows throughout the year. Red would be, here in the low flow, and the blue in the high flow, and the black line is where we actually were. And as you can see, in June, it was actually starting to get low flow and dry, but ever since July, we've been at average or above, and way above average here, September, October. It's reflected in our reservoir levels, and I've mentioned this really before. If there's any graph that describes what the weather's like and what our water supply is like, it's this one, because this shows the 2016 drought and the reservoir level, which got really low until we got some. Thankfully, I got some rains later in the summer. It recovered. Then again, we sort of mimicked it in the 2020 drought, but not quite as low. And then last year we were dry up until about July, and we've been kind of wet ever since. Our water levels in our wells are very high right at the moment, which is good news overall supply. Speaking of wells, we're moving forward. The Collins well number 2 is still in design right now, and working on bringing that forward and fitting it up for the system. The Little Bay Water Transmission Project, I know last meeting I mentioned that we had a very high bid. We had one bidder. We had a lot of interest, but a lot of good feedback from the bidders, including the one that submitted a very high price that we did not accept. Basically, it boiled down to the window of time that the permit allows for work near the water and in the water. So we've been working with the regulators on that to try to extend that, but we've broken the project into 3 phases. So the first one is right out to bid right now, and that is to replace the valves. There's a valve on each of the lines here when the line splits. A valve on the Durham side and two valves on the Durham side and two valves on the Newington side. And so that work will happen this spring. We do have enough money to do it. And we do expect bids to come in and have a contractor out there this spring working on that. And then once that project commences, we will bid the water line, the new third water line. I know there's been confusion as to we're taking two lines and just going with one as a replacement. It's actually, we're gonna end up with three lines when we're done. And part of this project too, with the circles, the valve project is actually to do the taps that are for that new line. So it's ready to go. And then hopefully we get a favorable bid next spring while the work's going on the valves. And if that's good and we can move forward, then it'll be the project will continue in the fall and put the new line in. Otherwise, we have the new valves, which allows us opportunity to shut off one of the lines if it springs a leak and get out there and fix it. And thirdly, we are looking at an interconnect with Dover along here, the Route 4. It's maybe you could say pie in the sky, but certainly something we need to look at. We need to look at all options. So we are visiting that and seeing that would not eliminate this. It just provide more redundancy and more capability to move water around. So we've got an engineer under contract right now doing that work. Emergency interconnection with Dover. That project too was out to bid for DOT for the bridge, the bicycle pedestrian bridge. Again, they also got a very high bid. And perhaps Jim knows they may be rebidding this as far as I know.
I'm not sure.
And
Sorry.
so that's what we hear. Unfortunately, the bridge bid was high. The components of putting a water line on the bridge actually came within our budget and the monies that we had from Senator Shaheen and together with us and Dover. So we'll see where that goes. Watershed, we are in the midst of acquiring this easement on Hayes Road. And we got support of our city council, and then also we have funds from the state to reimburse us for half of the costs, and also we are expecting maybe some funds from Senator Shaheen as well. Pipe replacements, if you've been down Middle and Union, you've seen our crews out there working on, replacing water, sewer, storm drains. The same goes with Islington. And this photo, this is our crew. This was taken about maybe 3 or 4 in the morning this summer. They went out on Market Street and replaced some valves that were not working very well. And hats off. This was done by our crew in the middle of the night. So really good work. And it really avoided what would have been a really big project to do that. We have inspected all our tanks as part of our abbreviated master plan work that's going on with Haley Ward. They are doing a hydraulic assessment of the whole southern portion of the system, and the entire system is getting an update of the hydraulic model, which looks at all the piping and infrastructure related to that. Also, another component of kind of master planning is this interconnection mutual aid study that I'm part of the Seacoast Drinking Water Commission, and I'm the chair of the committee that interviewed and selected Underwood to do the work. And so they're going to be working throughout the year, and they'll be done this time next year. So maybe we'll invite them to a SWAG meeting to talk about that. But it's essentially to look at all the water systems you see on this map here, plus some extended regional look at, water sources, pipes, what kind of interconnections can happen between communities, and how can, we help each other out. PFAS, so here's the latest rounds of PFAS, the 12-month rolling average. So again, we sample quarterly, and our the regulatory requirement in New Hampshire is to average those 4 quarters. We anticipate that'll be the same with the EPA's regulation. And what you see here on the chart are basically the running averages of our results to date right now. For all of our water sources, minus the P's sources, because they do have PFAS in the Haven, Harrison, and Smith wells. But as you can see, we're non-detect on the regulated compounds at our treatment plant. And that if the regulations do come in at 4, which is the proposed, you can see the sources that it would affect at the moment, and there would be some phase-in period of time if the regulations do come into effect. So we are out to bid for treatment of the Greenland wells. So we have $2.5 million available for doing filtering, and we just assume there we're going to go with granular activated carbon. And so that's underway, and we'll be getting bids in on that fairly soon from our engineers. And we imagine to try to fast track that because it's not that complicated. We do have to work with the town of Greenland to acquire a little bit of extra land because it's a very small site. And we'll work with them on that. And then the Portsmouth and Collins, we've got preliminary assessment of type of treatment and costs and where it would go. And we're working with the Air Force, especially if the regulations come down, we'll be knocking on their door to reimburse us for that. So where are we at with the pending MCLs? So it's our understanding EPA is still reviewing comments, but as I mentioned, we have treatment design currently out to bid on the Greenland well, and we will work with the Air Force on Portsmouth and Collins wells if need be on that. So.
Okay, great. If you wouldn't mind just pulling up my slides, I'll go really fast
Sure.
and then we can switch to questions, public comment, and then wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you for that. While he's pulling that up, I just wanted to provide a brief update on the Seacoast Private Well Workshop. So at our last meeting, Amy Hudnor from New Hampshire DES came to present information on the efforts of DES to do private well sampling throughout the region. And at the time in September, the Seacoast region was being targeted in November. And they held a meeting for the communities of Greenland, Portsmouth, Newington, and Rye. Private well owners, and I was able to attend the workshop. This is a picture I took from the back of the room. It was standing room only. So I get excited when I see people caring about water quality. I know that's silly, but I wish more people would engage and care about those things. So I was glad to see that they had such a good turnout. They did ask in the beginning of the meeting who was kind of representative in the room. There was just a couple people from Portsmouth and Newington. Most of those folks were Greenland. About 180 attendees. Amy updated me, 160 households are submitting water samples. And they're working on preparing a final report for the Seacoast Drinking Water Commission. So maybe we can find a way to share some information, Brian. There's more information here on the project. If anyone's interested, Amy is the contact, and the next community they are targeting is Dover. And they're going to have a workshop in January. People have to register. So this was the Dover information. I know that doesn't apply to us here in Portsmouth, but just wanted to share it in case anybody's watching this. Next slide, please. I think the last the last thing was actually just around our there we go, the annual report. So I circulated a draft for everybody about a week ago. And my hope is to get comments back from all of you, feedback by next week. So a week from today, if possible, with the plan to send this final report to the city council by the end of 2023. We are an advisory group. We don't vote on anything. We don't make any decisions, but we do have the ability to advise the city council, share recommendations. So we created a summary of all the work that we've done in the last 2 years, the topics we discussed, and a list of recommendations. All of that is in that draft report that was emailed to you. And I look forward to any comments that you have, hopefully in the next week or so we can get that out to the city council by the end of the year. And that is it. So why don't we switch to questions? If anyone has questions for Brian or myself on the report, and then we'll end with public comment. So I have a couple questions, Brian, for you, if that's okay. So I wanted to ask about the PFAS update that you gave. So you mentioned at the Greenland well, the plan is for GAC filtration. Is there any talk about what technology would be used at the Portsmouth and the Collins well? Would that be GAC only or
Probably the same, yeah.
just GAC, not resin? Okay.
It probably isn't with the numbers not near what they are in the Pease wells. GAC
Would be sufficient. Okay. In terms of okay, thank you. In terms of the Great Bay line work that you were talking about, so I know the costs were really high, and I'm just curious, do you think that that's because of inflation? Is that, I know you also mentioned the timing of the permit, so what efforts are being made to try to bring the costs of that project down so it becomes more affordable?
We're hiring a contract to do value engineering. So get a contractor to say, hey, you know, these means and methods might work better.
Okay.
We've had meetings with the regulators to expand that window, and we tentatively have 6 additional weeks of in-water work that they've been thinking that they'll approve.
Okay.
So we're trying to get that approved prior to rebidding it again. Another thing too is, you know, the window of time is not the easiest window right now. When we bid it, it was November 15th to March 15th through winter. The one contractor that did come and came there for the bid opening asked me, well, what do you think the weather's going to be like this winter? And I was like, well, you know, I'll tell you what, crystal ball, it could be, I said, if it's like last winter, it's going to be mild, but we could have 3 blizzards. So I am not, you know, going to tell you that. So that's part of it. But it is what it is because of the nature and its title, which is not easy work either, to try to stretch a pipe across the bay with tides and that. So.
And you mentioned the Dover connection there, the bids for that also came in high as well. Is it?
That was for the bridge. Yeah.
Okay. Is that for similar reasons because of timing or don't know?
No,
Okay.
all pricing overall, I mean, just for our regular pipeline projects is, we're 70%, well, 50 to 70% higher than we were 3 or 4 years ago.
Wow. And that's from
Contractors are
inflation?
busy and
No.
materials are expensive. Things have leveled up and hopefully they'll start coming down a bit. But
Okay. In terms of water preservation, conservation, I didn't know if you could speak to, there's a water reuse study that's being looked at Pease for the wastewater treatment plant.
yeah, that's wastewater, and that's part of our planning horizon for the wastewater plant. So the Pease wastewater treatment facility is going through some upgrades. And part of that is to identify you know, means to, you know, have water sources. We've got a lot of customers, and I think I've shown this at past meetings, that they use a lot of water for things that aren't for drinking. And, you know, you got golf courses, we have a lot of cooling, we have 2 power plants that use a lot of water. We have 2 gypsum plants, use a lot of water. So if those places could use water that's not the drinking water, it'd be a beneficial thing for everybody. But that's a long way off right now. We are working on just trying to assess the ability as part of our design on the Pease wastewater.
Okay.
So it's a long ways off.
Okay.
And I'll certainly be able to update, you know, here if things move in that direction.
Okay. Sounds good. I think that's it for my questions. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Brian, I just have I think it's an easy one, just general knowledge for me. At your graph where you show the water levels, you know, when we're above and below, that elevation is 135. Is that the top of the dam at Bellamy?
Yeah,
The very top? Because I know it's notched, so.
yeah, yeah. It's when it starts overflowing, yeah.
Because I know there's different I was just curious. I mean.
Yeah, there's a spillway and then there's a
Right.
further one, and then there's also an outlet, a pipe that keeps water flowing all the time.
So 135 is the top line of the
Yeah,
dam?
yes.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions? Okay, I guess we'll open it.
Laurel did sign off after the lead said she had
Okay.
to run, so, and we did not get anyone else that joined in, so.
Okay,
We're it.
okay. No public- Oh, sure, go ahead. sir.
When you get to that.
Yeah, I guess we're moving into public comment, which is the very end. So if you have some things to say, please join us.
I just, before Justin, I
yeah.
just wanted to thank Brian and Andrea for all your work on this committee. I mean, I know you're paid, but but you're still here late and you're always enthusiastic, and especially to you, Andrea, this is a lot of work, and
Thank you.
this is not your only gig advocacy wise, so thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you. And
Thank you.
thanks to other staff. Stephanie does our meeting minutes. She's been writing and writing and writing. And
Yeah.
then Mariah and Mason.
And Al Pratt, his
Oh, yeah.
stuff, so
Al
tell
got
him that too.
Greg, I told him he could zoom in if he wanted, but he didn't have to, so.
All right. If you could just state your name, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Justin Richardson. I live at 586 Woodbury Avenue in Portsmouth. I am a water supply drinking water attorney. And so this stuff is near and dear to my heart. I was shocked because when I saw the test results on lead that came in, my oldest kid, Elsa, was in color guard in 2019. They used to do their practices in the Lister Academy, and I showed them the results, and they said, yeah, that's the sink where we all used to fill our water bottles. I was surprised to hear that there was a Poland Spring drinking water there, because that's the information I had is that it was they were using the sink there. What I wanted to say, because you guys have actually done a really good job of covering most of my comments. Obviously, lead is horrific. It causes permanent, irreversible damage. There's no safe level. The concept of an action level, and I hope I get this right, but it's not based on, it's based on normally when do we want a drinking water supplier to start to take action when the source is from the internal plumbing. The safe level of water safe level of lead is 0. So that's the MCL goal. That hasn't changed. The EPA issued its notice of proposed rulemaking, lowering it further. That was on November 30th, the same day we got our test results. So it was kind of, I mean, I was actually on the EPA call and with my friend, and they changed it. And then, I started seeing results of 180. What I want to encourage, though, is that this group, if you can, because it would be very helpful to have an independent, the school system is like the polluter in this instance. I mean, they're the ones that are responsible for where the contaminants come from. They have to pay for it. It comes out of their budget. They have a lot of competing demands. I would love it if you could push for an outcome where we don't look at, retesting and in order to reduce the number of sites that we remediate, because the problem is not, what the test result is when it's tested properly and it's only there for 8 hours, but not more than 18. It's when it's the Monday after school vacation, when the kids come in and they don't know. I mean, they're guinea pigs. They don't know if a human being has gone around to all 143 sites throughout the district in every building and run them to make sure they're clean or not. I mean, they're just filling their water bottles. They're late for class. Kids don't use their lockers anymore because they can't get between classes fast enough. So they're just going to grab water from wherever.
and they're not always there at the times we expect them to be. And any level of lead can poison people. So I think it would be great if this group could urge the school district to say, no, take a hard look at this. There were 7 samples that were done in the 2019 round that were above the current action level of 5. I just went and checked. You can download them on the DES website. You can sort them by where they are. There's like 43 of them now. There's other ones that we don't know about because they just happened to be running. They were good that day. They'll be bad another day. So that's all I wanted to say. And really thank you guys for making my job easier by picking up on almost everything that I was looking at as well.
Great. Thank you for coming out tonight. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your participation and your engagement. And we'll stay in touch through email about the report. Any comments? We'll make sure you have a final copy before we send it over to the council. And then we are a group that has to be reinstated by the council. So once that happens in the next after the new year, we'll be in touch about continuing to schedule meetings and hopefully meet quarterly like we have been. So just thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your engagement and your ability, willingness to stay late and always talk about these topics. So thanks. Have a great holiday.
So just curious on the council thing, SWAG as a group has to be recreated every council?
It's every 2 years, yes.
So.
It's a mayor's committee.
Yeah, we're
Oh,
not like a
okay.
formal, I don't know the difference on it,
Right.
but yeah,
So it has. Yeah, it just has to be reconstituted
Yeah.
or
Instated.
re-legitimized. I don't know what
Yes.
the word is.
yes, we formed in 2020, kind of in the middle of a,
So it's a blue ribbon committee.
Yes,
yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good point.
So,
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a